And just wanted to do a little bit. So going to do a really quick introduction for just kind of the next, the rest of Revelation, and then we'll do our kind of our normal self-study large group. And then I want to give us a little bit of time. So we're in week 9 of 15 weeks. So I thought it might be good to do a little bit of time to self-reflect, just what we feel like God's been saying to us, and then we'll do a wrap up. So in terms of an introduction, so in a lot of ways, and chapters 12 to 22, it tells the same story that chapters 1 to 11 did, but it's going to explain a lot of things in greater detail. So some of the things that maybe got implied before, it's going to really kind of tuck into. And in chapter 12, what we're studying today, it's going to reveal that it's the devil himself is the deeper source of evil, which we all know that, but Revelation has hinted at that, but now it's very directly is going to declare that. And John is going to introduce to us these 4 figures. So you get the devil / dragon, the beast, the false prophet, and the harlot. And the interesting things about this is, so he'll introduce first the devil, then the beast, and the false prophet, and then the harlot, and then he'll reverse, then you'll see their demise in the reverse order. So the harlot will go down, the false prophet, then the beast, and finally the devil. And it seems to be that way for probably a few reasons. That one, it just kind of highlights from first to last that the devil is the initiator of resistance to God's people. So anyways, and then there's something called the 7 signs. And so from chapters 12 verse 1 to 15 verse 4, depending on how you look at it, there are 7 signs that get introduced, and that seems to be intentional. And they'll get introduced with 6 of the 7 times when they get introduced, you're either John's gonna say, and I saw, or he's gonna say, I looked. And then actually what we see today is, he doesn't say I saw or looked, but this portent appears, okay, which is also something very visual, and he's describing that. So the first one is the conflict of the serpent with the woman and her seed. So we're looking at that today. Then the next one we'll look at a lot of these we'll look at next week. So the persecution by the beast from the sea, then the persecution by the beast from the land, Lamb and the 144 standing on Mount Zion, the proclamation of the gospel and judgment by 3 angels, the Son of Man's harvest of the earth, and the saints' victory over the sea beast and their victory song. Okay, so to me it seems intentional that John is kind of introducing these 7 signs. So once again we have a pattern of 7. So I want us now to just take about 15 minutes, look at the manuscript. We might, I know a lot of times we don't have time for questions. This one, since it's a bit shorter, I have to be honest, I won't promise you because we don't always have time, but I love to do the questions. So if you have a question, please put it on chat, and if we can get to it, we will. And with that, I will see you friends in 15 minutes.
Hello, this is Kim. Goodbye.
And then you'll see there's some key scriptures, and I put them in chat. And then I'm going to stop screen sharing here, but you can see it you can see them in chat. Yeah, like I said, I'll try to get these. So I'm just gonna try to make it so I can see everybody. Okay, so sorry, sorry, old guys that don't understand technology. All right, I'll be right back. Why is this doing this to me? Oh, okay. Okay, okay. See if I remember this next week, but I figured out what I did. But the question for us is, so how's the woman described in the first two lines, and who or what might the woman represent? And we have a couple questions related to this too. Is what does this woman represent? Why the imagery of childbirth? How will the readers interpret this in light of other references to women childbirth in the OT? Why does the dragon fight her? Why is so little info given about her? So we can also answer those questions, and those you'll see those in your, you should see those in your chat too. So it's time to answer the woman questions. I have a lot of questions about women, but a lot of you probably have a lot of questions about men. So, all right, I should stop there.
Yeah, so one kind of obvious possibility, I guess, is Mary, the mother of Jesus, and that the son is Jesus. Except like the story seems to be more about her and less about her son, which intrigues me.
Okay. All right. So Mary, Mary's definitely a big, so a lot of commentators will say Mary. The Catholic Church, that's how they land on it too.
I think I wondered if this was like imagery of like God as mother, which we don't see a ton of, but and a possibility is like mother God giving forth life. And yeah, the child could be Jesus. That's what I was thinking, or God's people. Some possibilities.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
Yeah, at the end of the chapter, it says, like on line 14 of page 2, like the dragon is making war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So she also seems to be like the mother of the church or the mother of believers.
Okay.
I connected it with the Isaiah passage, and my thought was that it was more like a female-ish God kind of thing, bringing forth Israel, and that and then from Israel came the Christian religion. So, you know, it kind of hands itself down. And then the crown of 12 stars represents the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
I think it's probably at least worth considering all the way back to Eve, just the mother of all living. And then, because that connects kind of the promise of the seed of the woman, which connects with Jesus, I think, in this passage. Although I do think it may be kind of a both and with, I like the idea of Israel, especially with the 12 stars being used there, and the other offspring, kind of Israel, church, people of God imagery.
Yeah. Well, it, to me, I do think it's I think it's a both and. So I think it is describing, it's Mary. I mean, Mary has Jesus. So I think it's describing that event. And I think there is, like, literally, and we'll talk about this in a sec, but literally as Mary's about ready to give birth to Jesus, and then right after that, I mean, probably more right after that, but she's very vulnerable. But there's also in kind of the Jewish mindset, they definitely would have portrayed righteous Israel as the mother, as the restored future remnant of Israel. And then also in Jewish tradition, Zion or Jerusalem often appears as a mother. And we will see the new Jerusalem kind of coming down, and that's representing the church. Okay. So the kind of the connecting with Jerusalem. So that's this Isaiah passage that Kim also reference, but also it's okay, but it's not just obviously Jerusalem, the city, it's representing Israel and more. And this is so in Genesis, there's the story of Joseph, and he has this dream, and in his dream, it's the sun, the moon, and it's the 11 stars, and Joseph being the 12th star. So I think just this idea that it's Israel. Excuse me. But then, yeah, and you also referenced this, but there's this idea that Israel in the new covenant, it's expanded. So it's no longer being a natural child of Abraham. It's being a spiritual child of Abraham. And yeah, because I think some of you are you're feeling the tension. It's like, well, it seems to be like Mary, because Mary's literally the person who had the child. But wait a minute, there's some other stuff, and no, it seems to be more like Mary, and I think that's, yes, exactly. So I think, again, what I appreciate about Revelation is it's a many layered work. So, and then, yeah, that's just another passage that kind of gets at, we're all heirs, we're all children of Abraham, Allah, we're all Israel. So, so I have some questions about, okay, and I drive myself crazy because this is meant to be my little click, 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 and it's all in one thing, but that's all right. So now we're in lines 4 through 7, and let's talk about first the dragon. So I've kind of told you how the dragon's described, but what might all this stuff represent? And dogs, I'm gonna okay, I'm gonna take us back. I'm just gonna verbally ask these things. Yeah, the dragon, how's he described, and what might all this stuff represent?
Satan, Lucifer.
Johnny, you cut out.
I said the dragon represents Satan.
Satan, okay. Yep. All right, yep. And how's he described?
He has 7 heads, and on the 7 heads, he has 7 diadems, which is like a crown, right? Or a tiara or something.
Yeah,
And then he has 10 horns.
okay.
I can remember back when I first studied this, which would have been in the 80s or something like that. He's described as red, and that obviously meant communism back in those days. And
Yeah.
so it's interesting to see how interpretation changes a bit. As you were saying, David, when we first started this, interpretation has changed a bit based on the culture at the time. So yeah, the red dragon was communism, and it was coming to get us all.
Well, doesn't the Canadian flag have a red maple leaf on it? So I think to me it's Canada. So
Is it the American flag, red, white, and blue?
There you go.
Ooh. Wow, I didn't expect you to notice that, Heather. So yeah, well, even okay, I mean, sis, red, so red's probably is symbolic. It probably doesn't mean communism, because the original reader wouldn't have been connecting that, oh hey, this is communism, but what might red represent?
Red often represents blood,
Yeah.
but it seems like in I'm trying to remember what the word is for it. It sometimes it represents courage too. It seems like, but definitely blood.
Yeah.
People might associate it with Roman armies.
Yeah, that's true too. Yep. There's so I've talked about, so even with the dragon, in Greek mythology, you would have had things like the 7-headed Hydra. And Old Testament, they have images of these leviathans, like these massive sea monsters, things like that. So there could have been different images kind of coming up, but definitely, and Revelation, it just flat out tells us it's Satan. And okay, now let's let's get at and just also note 1/3 of the stars. Well, we'll get to that. Okay, so the 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 diadems, what does that represent?
Kingdoms.
Yep, kingdoms.
Power and authority.
Yeah. And what's 7 or 10 typically represent?
So I think if we connect it to Daniel chapter
Mhm.
7, it represents kingdoms and 10 kings, 7 kingdoms and 10 kings.
Yeah. No, and Daniel, you're right. Daniel 7 is an important kind of, I mean, we keep going back to Daniel 7, but I think this is definitely, it's definitely hitting on that. The numbers 7 or 10 themselves, what do those symbolize typically?
They're both completeness, right?
Yeah. So this, okay, this to me, it's a disturbing, at first pass, it's a disturbing thing for me, because it's like, okay, wait a minute, like Satan's not supposed to get 7 or 10, right? I mean, I don't associate, he's 6. I mean, that's what he's short of 7. And diadems and crowns, and I mean, Jesus gets a crown, or the church gets the crown, not Satan. So why have Satan depicted in this way?
Perhaps this is like the number of followers that he's managed to gather up.
Okay.
And because it's like a 7, his time for gathering is now complete, and he's
Okay.
gonna move on to the next stage or the next whatever.
Good. Yeah.
Is it to clue in the reader that God is in this somehow?
Yeah, it could be. So hey, yeah, I think so. I mean, say more about that, John.
Well, I don't know. 7 and 10 just keeps coming up as God's plan. So it reminds me of Romans, Paul saying, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who are called according to his purpose, right? So it could be scary, but it's like under God's ordaining or God's authority.
Yeah.
I think it could just be, I mean, in some ways it feels like it's mixing symbolism a little bit, but if 7 and 10 are those numbers of totality or completeness, then if it's associated with the dragon, it's just the completeness and totality of all that opposes God. Sorry, that was my phone being annoying. So yeah, just the completeness or totality of everything that is against God, both in heaven and on earth.
Yeah. No. So I like that. So because completeness or perfection. So obviously it's not saying that Satan's complete, but it's the sovereignty of God. I think it's also the reality of spiritual warfare. So this is not a weak dragon. I mean, the crowns signifies, and the sweep of his tail. So the 1/3, what's the 1/3 of the stars? What does that represent?
Have we seen 1/3 of the stars falling out of the sky with like one of the trumpets or something? I feel like there have been a lot of stars falling, and
Yeah,
I don't remember the details.
Yeah, I don't think we've had a third of the stars. I think a star's fallen, or some stars have fallen, and then you get a third of the water or the sea, or I don't think we've gotten a third of the stars falling.
Was this a reference to the angels that fall with the devil? When the devil goes down, a third of the angels go with him.
Yeah, I think that's probably it's what I think too. I think it's the typical kind of view of this. So when Satan rebels, it's not just Satan. I mean, the demons are also fallen angels. And so he takes a third of, these angelic beings with him, which would also count as, a fair amount of power just to be able to deceive like that. Go ahead, Heather.
So in chapter 8, we have the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light might be darkened, and a third of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise a third of the night.
Okay.
But it doesn't say they fall.
Yeah, but it also gets at, so it's a little bit symbolic, but it's very helpful to be like, God's all powerful, Satan's not. But we once had a pastor friends just like, hey, and you know what, like 2/3 of the angels tend, like the point is, people get freak out so much about, oh man, demons, but it's like there's a lot more angels. In this, so a third means a significant amount, but it's not the majority. So was it literally a third? I don't think so, but I think it's saying a significant amount, but not the majority. I also, there's a couple other things. It's just there is a reality of spiritual warfare. So for people, you're like, hey, there's no devil, or there's none of the demonic. And part of me, it's like, yeah, I don't think you've ever really been abroad very much if you think that, or are all that sensitive to your own countries, because I see a lot of, it's just an aside, I think in the West it's a little bit more disguised. I think it's just as much typically, but if you go abroad, I've been next to the presence of evil before, like in a mosque in China, and I will probably never ever forget that, So anyway, but there's the reality of spiritual warfare. But the last thing has to do with perction. So because what the Holy Spirit, as he inspires John, there's also this idea of parody. So Satan as an imitation of God, but just not a great imitation, which is kind of the idea of a parody. So parody, one definition of a parody is a feeble or ridiculous imitation. So later we're going to see what a lot of commentators, they'll give us kind of a parody of the Trinity. So the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but in Revelation, the evil parody would be the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Okay, so it's something that's like, but it's weak in imitation, in comparison. So anyways, my Persian story is, to me, I think it's a good, and I just want to, China has awesome food. We all know that. I just want to really go on that. But back in the day, Lanzhou in 1996 did not have awesome Western food. And, you know, I think I told some of you, like, I mean, I was eating Chinese every meal, and I desperately wanted some Western food, and I was dreaming about eating McDonald's cheeseburgers. That tells you how hard I have. But in Lanzhou, we started to hear these rumblings of this new restaurant that was going to open up, and it was going to be like McDonald's. And McDonald's, I mean, I was so excited about McDonald's at the time. And so I went there, but you know, I start to notice a few things about Perkshin. First, it's the name. So it's named Perkshin, and it's like, Perkshin? Well, later I found out that it was meant to be called Perfection, but the person who kind of signed it up wasn't great at English. And again, I do want to be careful, because you know, you hear the stories of people and they get the tattoos, and it's like, it means, you know, I got a tattoo and it means princess in Chinese, and it's like, no, actually that means concubine, you know. So if you don't know a language, it's, you know, so I want to be, my point is, I'm not mocking a culture, okay, telling a story. So all right, no more qualifying. So anyways, but I go in there, and it kind of looked like McDonald's. I mean, it had the bright fluorescent lights and the shining plastic seats and the big menus at the front. But when I ordered it, I quickly realized it wasn't the same. So the special sauce, it was not the same special sauce. And they didn't have the cheese, and the meat just didn't taste all that good. And the buns really weren't all that fresh. And somehow the lettuce they didn't shred the lettuce in that McDonald's kind of way, and it had a different flavor. And my stomach always feels a little bit queasy after McDonald's, but there's kind of a whole new level of queasiness after eating it at Perkshin. And that's the point. It was a parody. It was this, and I didn't really go back to Perkshin, you know, after that. It's like, oh, what's the point? So Satan's powerful, obviously, but in comparison to Jesus, and we'll see this, he's nothing. I mean, he's stale bread, he's rotten meat, he's harmful, and his power in comparison to Jesus is his wilted lettuce, you know. So I think there's a few, for people who are like, you know, spiritual warfare, what's that about? It's like, no, it's real. For people who might be tempted to really fear Satan, it's like, no. In comparison to Jesus, this is nothing. So lines 7 to 10. So in regards to the male child, and you had questions about, we had some questions about the male child, but what historical events are being described? Do you think?
It could be Herod trying to have Jesus killed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's Matthew 2 does a wonderful job of just portraying the vulnerability of it all. I mean, you got a couple peasants, and you got the king that's after them, and he's a psycho dude, and he's killed members of his family, and he will kill babies in pursuit of Jesus. So what else? So is this just about the birth of Jesus, I suppose? Is another way of asking this.
No, I think it's also about his death. I mean, it's when they're trying to overcome him, but he was taken up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you looking for an allusion? Like it made me think a little bit about Hagar and Ishmael.
Okay. Why is that, John?
I haven't read the story lately, but I think she was banished to the wilderness or something. Like she was supposed to die, and then didn't God
Okay.
take care of her?
Okay. Yeah. And we will get, I mean, wilderness, it's a big theme in oh, and I just saw Ian, I am so sorry about the I didn't even think about the daylight savings thing and affecting
That's
South
all right.
Africa. So
No
I
worries.
will make a note of that, and with well, I guess all the South Africans are in the morning, so we might have a few other South Africans joining us. So yep, sorry about that. Yeah, anyways, the wilderness is a big theme that we'll get at. Yeah, John seems, it's kind of telescoping, so it just a very, one or two verses, it's like, here's the life of Jesus, right? And I love the word, some of the versions, and I think RSV did, and ESV I'd have to check again, but literally the word snatched. So it's kind of like a good movie, like in the nick of time, like God takes and snatches Jesus away. I want to go back a little bit into vulnerability. So Kim, can I put you on the Kim and let's see, Emily, are you here? I'm assuming. Yep. Kim and Emily. So you're right. You're right there, the midst of labor pains, babies coming out, pains, all of that. Are you ready to fight? Are you ready to fight somebody?
I'm busy being internal. External doesn't exist other than in relationship to all the stuff going on internally.
Yeah. Emily, are you ready to fight? A dragon at that point, just kind of.
Physically, probably not, but I think there is kind of like this mom bear sensation.
Okay.
Like, if you touch my baby, I will shred you to pieces.
Okay.
So that
Okay.
kind of happens. I don't know if
Okay.
it happens during labor, but certainly.
I think after.
Yeah.
I mean, the point is, like, so you're talking like the most vulnerable, it's one of the most vulnerable images I could think of. So here it is, this woman and this little bit, I mean, again, babies, newborn babies, how do they do at fighting? They're not really good at fighting, and you have this big dragon, and that's the way things were. And then, but God, so God intervenes and rescues them. But in the natural, there's no hope. In the natural, when Herod is after baby Jesus, there is no hope. It's baby Jesus, you're gonna die. Because it's like this image of a woman giving birth, and there's this dragon right there just waiting for the baby to come out. But
even
God.
What I'm remembering is even with all the other babies that were killed, he killed all of them up to 2 years old. So even post birth, when mothers had a chance to recuperate and stuff, you didn't have an opportunity to fend him off when he sent his soldiers to kill your child.
Yeah. So So then let's, in line 12, where it says 1260 days. Okay. I'm going to not do that next week on my PowerPoint, but it says 1260 days. And I think, Kim, I think in chat, did you reference both of them? Or okay, Kim's in her chat, it's like that equals 3.5 years, or perhaps times a half a times. But where have we seen the equivalent of this number 1260 in Revelation? We've seen it twice recently.
Is it the witness time period?
Yeah,
The two
the two witnesses, and what else? So the equivalent. So 1260 has been mentioned once before, and the equivalent of 1260 days, which is 42 months or 3.5 years. Let me just give it right there. All right. So it's the 42 months that was mentioned last week and 1260 days. And my take on that is, hey, that's talking about this time of kind of between Jesus's resurrection and he comes back in his glory. We have seen this time frame again, and I think it's the third time the equivalent's mentioned. It's going to be mentioned again, I think, next week to 42 months, and every time I think it's referring to the same thing. So just kind of point at that, and that kind of gets at this next question. When do you think the war in heaven described in lines 12 to 18 took place?
Maybe Genesis
Okay.
3.
Okay. Why do you think that, John?
That's the fall passage. So Adam, Eve, but also the serpent receive curses, and then after this part in Revelations, you see the pursuit of mankind by Satan.
Okay.
Match.
Okay.
Technology.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the war against humanity kind of starting then. But so John, in your mind, then is that war kind of a longish thing that's being described in Revelation, the time frame?
Yeah, I don't know. This is such a trippy chapter in terms of chronology. Like, I think I'm realizing this is not a linear chapter here. So
Okay.
I don't know how to think about it, because first of all, there's the blood of the lamb and the testimony and all that, but then later on it says there's this pursuit of the woman for a long time by the dragon.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to interrupt. Hey, Wesley, I just want to apologize to you. The US and Canada have this thing called daylight savings. You probably have heard about it. And I honestly, I just wasn't thinking South Africa, which I feel really bad about that, because I knew Canada had it. So we will be starting an hour earlier South African time in the future. And again, so sorry that I didn't let you know that, but in the future, it will be an hour earlier. So
No problem at all.
Wow.
Don't worry, Dave.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
We just got
Okay. So,
In
okay.
reference
What?
to
Go
David,
ahead.
and thank you. In reference to this, I think about all the songs that we sing at Easter that says, and Satan was defeated. And so talking about when Jesus rose up from the grave and how he'd spent the 3 days fighting off Satan, and Satan was defeated and thrown down, and now we have the opportunity for new life. And so that was, when I read through this, that's what my mind went to, was the battle of Jesus and Satan, and that Jesus won during those 3 days, 2.5 days, 3 days, whatever, at Easter.
Yeah, and so again, this is, we always get there. So this is the time where I start just kind of taking us out of conversation and just kind of have to start talking. But there are different takes on this, and it is a little bit, it can be a little bit confusing, because it's like, okay, there seems to be a lot of different things going on. The way I would describe it is, we have kind of these 3 snapshots in chapter 12, and they're in succession. And in fact, snapshot number 1 and snapshot number 2 are very close. So snapshot number 1, here's the life of Jesus from birth to resurrection. Snapshot number 2, this war in heaven. So there's different takes on it. My take on it is this: basically immediately when Jesus dies on the cross, and you know, that this war takes place and Satan gets tossed, and I use that because below, tossed or thrown out, I mean, it's literally, he gets tossed out of heaven, and this is the ultimate victory. Now, and I also want to say this. I have a friend, Bill Sirius, and years ago, he had this image of, sometimes when we study the Bible, it's like children who were playing with blocks in the living room, and the parents are having an adult conversation, and you're just absorbed and playing with your blocks. And then every now and then you surface and you kind of listen to what the adults are talking about. And then you kind of go back into you're just playing with your blocks. And some of that, and Revelation is one of these books, but other places where it's like, okay, there are things going on spiritually that I don't quite understand all of what's going on, but you kind of surface and you realize, because the reality is, because other passages of scripture, so Jude chapter 6, and there's a passage in 2 Peter 2, when Satan rebels, I mean, it's not like, hey, Satan and the demons just keep hanging out in heaven. Like they get kind of shown to the abyss, if you will. But there's also this seems to be this almost an authority or a right, if you will, for Satan to be in there accusing the brethren. And we see this in Job. So the beginning of Job, it's like Satan's there, and he's kind of, God's holding court and Satan's doing his thing. And we see that also with Zechariah, where I think it's Joshua the high priest, or it might be Zerubbabel, but the governor, but Satan's accusing them. But with this, there's kind of that final authority, if you will, like it's gone. Okay. And I don't, again, fully understand all the ins and out of that, but I do understand. I suppose the implications, I get that, because the implications are huge, that there's no longer an accuser of the brethren in heaven. And I'm just going to pivot a little bit into losing a battle versus losing a war. So previously we saw that there are these two witnesses that were conquered when Satan made war on them. And but this is what we're getting in, and I'll bring it up there. So that's Revelation 11:7. So again, I think this is the church. This might be something that's hasn't taken place yet. I don't think it has, but it's Satan conquers them, and there's a defeat, and it's a temporary defeat. But now when we get into Revelation chapter 12, it's like, okay, Satan's defeated. There's no longer a place for him in heaven. He's thrown down to earth, the angels with him, and that the church now, we share in that victory. So, and they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, includes us, and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. So, because of the cross, it's not even a temporary defeat. Like, so it's like, okay, 11:7, it's like, oh, wow, you got conquered. But it's like, well, actually, you didn't. You conquered Satan. And I think John intentionally kind of leaves that intention a little bit. It like conquered, but conquering. He waits until chapter 12 when he wants to lay out, I'm going to lay out that Jesus on the cross, on the basis of that is how the church conquers. And because of that, even when it seems like the church is conquered, even a temporary defeat, it isn't a defeat. Because how does the church conquer him? Well, they conquer him by the blood of the Lamb. So they conquer him through Jesus and the word of their testimony. Well, what are they testifying about? They're testifying about Jesus's, God's love for us, Jesus' death on the cross, and his resurrection. And they are loving Jesus to the point that they're willing to give up their lives. And that's Satan's being conquered through that. So kind of through the blood with that. So so I just want to take us back there. It's like in Jesus, there's really, you don't lose a battle really at all, because actually it's by giving up your life that you conquer. Okay, so 3 photos in succession. I mentioned this, but the accuser gets thrown down, and with this, let me check the time. Good. Okay, so Satan's upset, right? So he knows his time is short, so now he's on earth and he's mad, and he's furious, and he goes off on war and the rest of the offspring. And I suppose I want to mention a few things. One is this isn't surprising. So you remember how I said that there's kind of 4 different kind of classical approaches to Satan. So you got the preterist and the futurist and the historicist, but you have the idealist. And to me, this is when I think the idealist kind of comes into play, because I think there are many dragon-esque things out there that portray the evil of the dragon, but also act like a dragon. And in history, there have been these dictators, and even though they know they've lost, they don't give up, and they take everything down with them they can. So Saddam Hussein, second war, he knows he's going to lose. Like, it's the might of the US Army is arrayed against him, and he gets an out. He's offered, it's like, hey, if you step down, here's this country that's willing to take you, and it'll be a nice house and you can have a nice retirement. But does he do it? No, he fights, and all this destruction in his own country, and in the end he gets killed. Adolf Hitler, you know, I mean, again, classic kind of guy. It's like, you know, the Russians are at the gates of Berlin. The war's over, but does he give up? Nope. He fights to the bitter end. And you see this all the time. And why do you see this all the time? I think it's because I think these folks are being influenced by demonic forces, and demonic forces, they're not rational, and they don't just say, okay, I'm going to lose, so why stop fight? It's like, I'm going to take everything down with me that I can. But it's also a good sign. So the fact that the devil is enraged and attacks Christians, well, that's a great sign, because the reason he does that is he knows he's been defeated, and it's decisive defeat. It's over with. And he knows that his rage is limited. So I think I want to just I want to end a little bit in terms of spiritual warfare, to say, hey, you know what? Yes, we're involved in spiritual warfare that I think we should be aware of it, and not just kind of say, oh yeah, I don't think about it and it's not that big of a deal. It is big. It is a big deal. But I think with the balance of, but you know what? Satan's conquered. He's lost. His time is short, and these are just his last death throes of a war that he's already lost. And with the heat, if it's like, wow, the heat seems to be getting stronger, and in a sense, it's just like, well, that's his desperation. That's his final death throes. So we're not meant to be freaked out by this. We're not meant to be like, I think in a sense, we respect the power that is in Satan. I think Jude, to me, teaches me that a bit. But we don't overly respect it, and we don't give into fear, and we keep going back to Jesus, to the cross, to his victory. The last thing I want to do now is I want to give us just a few minutes. So again, this is, now we're finishing up study 9 out of 15, and just, you know, as you reflect on the past 9 weeks, what do you feel like God's been kind of bringing home to you? What do you think God might be? What do you feel like God might be saying to you? And I'll give us just a chance for those of us who want to just share a little bit about that. But I'm going to give us a few minutes now, just to kind of, some of you probably have already reflected on the question, but I'm sure not everybody has. And then we'll come back in just a few minutes, and we'll just kind of share that. folks, want to share, I think again, a brief, but what do you feel like God's been saying to you as you studied Revelation?
Can go because I asked Eric to hold Miles while we shared. I wanted to thank you guys for letting me join, even though my baby can be really distracting. And I think being a mom at home with a baby can be isolating, and in a pandemic on top of that. Plus, like in Toronto, we're on month 6 of total lockdown, so it's just been really lonely. So having this time to engage with adults has been really great for me. And I think the thing that God has really spoken to me is from when we studied the word to the 7 churches, hold fast in particular. So just keep going, hang in there. I kind of come back to that word on a weekly, if not daily basis from Revelation. So it's been good.
For me,
Yeah.
this has given me a new perspective on Revelations, because as I said, when I studied it before, it was all about how are the current events reflected in what's being written in Revelations. Where are we in this timeline? What does the timeline mean? How close are we to the end of the world? That sort of thing. So this is a much different perspective, and a much more hopeful and less scary one. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Dave, I echo that in terms of just looking at the different perspective, and just almost your opening statement on lesson 1, where this book is all about Jesus, rather than possibly the sort of emphasis on the end times. And for me, it's just been fantastic it almost ties in with a lot of the other books now. So it's beginning to make sense. So thank you. Thanks to you and Joy, and look forward to the rest.
I think for me, this has actually been the huge book for me, and just and probably even before we started to have it, but I think it's just got intensified. I think it's been years for me since I've felt this close to God, felt this intimate, and I think God's just been using these different images of what he's like and what life is like to I just some fresh ways to reflect on God. And it's it cycles, so there'll be these dark things, but there's always the light, there's always the end that it comes back to. And I don't mind the fact so much that it's like, hey, there's some hard things, because it's like, well, I think there's some hard things in life, but I think the fact that it's kind of cyclical and it keeps on kind of going back to the kind of the final end game, to me, I find really encouraging, and just kind of it presses that in. The one image that I think's been speaking a lot to me recently was just the father, when the father wipes away the tears. Anybody else want to share? You don't have to by any means, but you can if you want to.
Yeah, I relate a lot to what Ian said just about realizing that a lot of the stuff in Revelation is not unique to Revelation, it's in other parts of the Bible. And I don't know why this is comforting, but I think just the idea that suffering isn't new and that it's been there all along. And I think the way that we see God sees suffering and is aware of suffering, not in a like kind of patting people on the head, but like seeing it and really wanting to provide justice in the right way at the right time is really comforting.
All right, I'll just close this and let us go. But yeah, Jesus, just with today, we praise you that it's because of you that Satan has been ultimately defeated. And we are so grateful for that. We're grateful that we don't have an accuser in heaven that's bringing up all the places that we've messed up, because we have the work of your cross to be like, nope, that no longer applies. And give us faith that takes away fear. But also, Lord, just again, an amazing book. And I pray that you just continue to just work in our hearts through your word, through the book of Revelation. Bless us each this week, we pray. Amen. All right, friends. Well, again, good to see you all. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dave. Cheers.
Yep. Pleasure. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, David.
Bye-bye. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure.